Greg and Carroll, welcome back to the podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here and together.
Thanks for having us.
I've been wanting to talk to you both for a while now about Auden and O'Callaghan. And it was a perfect opportunity because A Friend in the Fire just came out last week, which is book 2. But before we get into all the book 2 goodness, I actually want to go back and talk about how you two came together and formed your writing partnership. How did that start?
Oh, man. Can we tell the non-embarrassing version?
Oh, I'd much rather have the embarrassing version.
Yeah, no, I think that's really the only version. There's no version.
That's the only version, Greg.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so I went to my first GRL was in Albuquerque. And in one of the panels, Carroll said something about wanting to co-write but haven't found the right person.
It was moderated by Will.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Will was the moderator of this panel.
Yeah.
And he had asked, had any of us co-written before? And 2 of the authors on this 3-author panel had actually co-written together. And then he asked me, he said, Carol, I don't think you have, but have you? And I was like, no, I've just never had the right partner. And then Greg made a scene.
I didn't make a scene. I raised my hand in the audience.
Very enthusiastically.
Well,
he was
yes.
5th grade in school.
Yes, that is correct.
And I zeroed in and I was like,
Yes.
he is very excited. We need to discuss.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, and then there was some chatting at the bar, right?
Yep.
And we kind of got to feel that we each got to feel the other wasn't too crazy. And then
that we kind of had the same methods of working. Yeah. I think the most important part was, do you work linear? Because some authors don't.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed by authors who don't work linear in a mystery.
Oh, I don't know.
I know some who don't,
Yeah.
and they write amazing books, but my brain can't wrap around that. That was one of the things where do you write every scene as it happens, or do you skip around? And he was like, no, I write every scene as it happens. So I'm like,
yeah, I don't know how. I mean, I can't. People talk about printing out their chapters and moving them around, physically moving chapters around after they've written the book. That gives me chills and
yeah.
I can't
the fact
even.
That Greg even plots makes me sort of palpitate a little bit. Just how do you plot this much? And then he's like, well, how do you not plot enough? And we'll find a healthy medium.
Yeah.
So he just doesn't tell me that he plotted, and it's great. That's what I need.
Yeah. Passive aggressive plotting, I think is what it's called.
That's a term I haven't heard before.
Yeah, I think we might be the only people in history.
Because then I'll be like, I don't know what's going to happen. He's like, well, what about? I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And then I don't know that, this was one of many ideas he had to placate me.
Well, listen, don't argue with what works. That's all I can say. I mean, are you a plotter, Jeff? I can't remember if we've talked about that before.
I am kind of a hybrid these days, but particularly when I'm doing mystery thriller elements, I do need that part mostly plotted. I mean, there's still some discovery that can go on in there, but I kind of need to know point A to point Z.
Yeah.
And the important things in the middle, who did what, when that might happen, when it's discovered, that kind of thing. I kind of need to know that.
Yeah.
Subject to moving around, but at least have to start with it.
Yeah.
You're a pantser for mystery, Carol?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I sit down and this is a good idea. Who did it? I don't know. Who are the red herrings? I don't know. Who are the characters? I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, Jeff, that face. Now that face through the entire time we were writing. Now you understand passive aggressive plotting.
Oh my goodness. Sam and Rufus had to come from somewhere. Did you come together to at least base the characters, or was that more passive aggressive character development as well?
I think we just kind of both came up, Greg sort of, can I tell the hot underwear story?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah.
Okay, so the hot underwear story.
It's exactly what it sounds like.
It's exactly what it sounds like. So I got it was maybe, I don't know, November, December, after GRL.
Yeah.
And I was knee deep reading Hazard in Somerset. And he was kind of thinking about maybe writing something together, but we both were like, we don't want to push it. When we have an idea, we'll have an idea. And I get a text message from him out of the blue, and he's like, hey, so my hot underwear woke me up and I had an idea. And I was like, let's talk about this first before we can get to the idea, because I need to understand what this text message even means. And he's like, I wore long johns to bed and it got hot and it woke me up. And I woke up with an idea. And
it was
he
like a fever dream, like a vision.
Yeah, a fever dream. He had a fever dream about Sam.
Yeah.
And another character, but he kind of, that character was like really vague and sort of just a gray outline because he had more emphasis on who would eventually be Sam. And then I liked the Sam, but I didn't really like the other vague outline. So I just kind of hemmed and hawed about that for a while. I was like, no, what if it's just a complete opposite? I see this guy as kind of grumpy, so I'm going to make this other character like really snarky just to like get on his bad side all the time.
Yeah.
How do we feel about that?
Yeah. So that's it. That sounds like passive aggressive character
really
development, doesn't it?
From a fever dream.
Yeah.
Is this how characters often come for you? Like because you're wearing underwear that gets too hot at night?
I wish. Maybe I should go back to sleeping in long johns. Maybe I'd have more ideas. Oh man, that was a first. That was a Auden Ashe exclusive character development process. Patent pending. Yeah.
That's amazing. Fever dreams from long underwear.
Well, let's not fixate on that part.
How can you not though? Such a thing to hold on to, right?
Okay, I do really like long underwear. I'm just gonna say that, and that's all I have to say on that point. But it's really comfy.
Okay, I was living in Key West at the time, so I was definitely not wearing long johns.
Yeah.
So I did not have a fever dream about Rufus.
But
I just wondered about a redhead, and redheads just by default are going to be snarky little assholes. So I'm like, well, there we go.
Now, Sam and Rufus, and you touched on this a little bit because, Sam's grumpy and Rufus is going to be snarky and get under his skin. They're very, very different characters, and yet in some ways they're very similar too, because they have a lot of baggage for one thing. They both have certain tics, I would say, that help them get through the day. Their first meeting in A Friend in the Dark, I have to say, and the early interactions was ridiculously fun to read. It was like a very uncute meet cute. How did you build their first meeting into what that would become?
Carroll kind of touched on this because there's only passive aggressive plotting happening. Like it really did just kind of come out of the moment, right? I mean,
we just kind of fed off each other's dialogues.
We'd written a few scenes of each character independently to try to get a feel for them. So we kind of started to get, a sense of how they might interact. But yeah, it was really kind of one of those things that was it just kind of.
We were vibing.
Yeah, it was. It really just flowed when it happened. Yeah.
It's great because Greg's really good at writing like really grumpy characters, as we know from Emery Hazard. So I was like, well, how would my characters, which I think more often than not are really dry, sarcastic characters, deal with meeting a character like Hazard? And that's sort of like how I approached Rufus with Sam. It was like a combination of Sebastian Snow meets Emery Hazard.
Which they kind of did one time.
Almost.
Almost. Yeah, that's another story though.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to have to pull on that thread later to know what that means.
Well, that's just like a little fun. Yeah, but we can talk about that for sure. Yeah, I think that scene, like really most of especially A Friend in the Dark, there was a lot of it just flowed and it just worked. I mean, was that your experience, Carroll?
Yeah, no, that book just was like, we started it and we're like, oh, we're done now?
Yeah, it worked. That one went really smoothly.
Yeah.
Interesting that it went so quickly for as intricate as it is too.
And I think that was one of those things where I think more in that first book, didn't we do kind of a lot of stepping back and kind of tweaking as we went? Carroll, like in terms of like deciding what we wanted to have happen and.
Yeah, the second book was required a lot more sort of revisions, but that was more revisions to a really sort of more next step complexity in the plot. And I feel like the first book was more revisions based on how we wanted to mold the characters.
Yeah.
The first book, I think, was a little bit more heavy on how much we want to emphasize who they were, how they interacted, the world around them. And then the second book was, we had way more revisions, but it wasn't Sam and Rufus so much as the mystery, especially since I wrote chapter 1 and had no idea what I was doing.
I mean, what is your process? I mean, Jeff, do you come back to things and do a big heavy rewrite, or what is your revision? Is that a big part of the process for you?
It depends on how well the first draft turned out.
Well, yeah, okay, that's fair.
I mean,
so you draft though, Jeff?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do everything I can to just throw it on the page and have the story.
Yeah.
Because I don't do that either. So I also can like barely wrap my head around drafting.
Oh, interesting. We're learning a lot about Carroll here. I have to get that
from beginning to end.
I have to get it all out on the page and then start to see, does it hold together? Did everything make sense from the plot that I had, or any turns that I took?
I mean, one little idea you had, did you remember to put it down? And
so you don't draft, Carroll. How does that work?
I stare at the wall a lot, and I write the sentence in my head, and then I write the next few sentences in my head and decide whether or not that sentence made sense. And if it makes sense for like a paragraph, then I put it down. Or it made sense when I did it, and a few days later I realized it was terrible and I delete the whole thing and start over again, which is my current predicament. So
interesting. So it sounds, if I'm thinking about this right, you do a lot of the drafting in your head.
In my head, yeah.
And so it's second draft that comes out on the page.
There is a draft. It's just all mental.
I couldn't keep mine in my head that long. It end up going somewhere.
I think my fingers are just lazy, and they like don't want to the typing unless it's like going to be the end result. They're like, nah, I wasn't feeling it.
The thing I find curious about the series, as I was getting into to Friend in the Dark, was you've got two characters who've come together here. They are not investigators. They're not police. They're not, anything associated with that. But they've become the primary ones working to solve the mystery of why their friend was murdered, even though the police say it was suicide. That had to be fascinating, I would think, to build, because you've both built mysteries with investigators and police, and you're stripping away all of the stuff that those characters would have to handle the problem and throwing it into essentially lay people.
Yeah.
Was that as fun as it sounds, or did that make it more difficult?
Both. It was difficult in a fun, challenging way. For me, anyway.
I mean, I think, didn't we kind of talk about that, Carol, when we were trying to think about Rufus as a police informant? Like, that was one of the things that was an advantage to putting him in that role, was it kind of
the original idea is that he was going to be auxiliary police, which is like not a full-fledged police officer in the city, but like they're like sort of like supplemental aid almost. Right. But then I didn't really want to do that, and then I can't even remember who had the idea of confidential informant, but it was like just enough of a connection to law enforcement that the tools are there if you can beg for it in the right way, but just removed enough that it left us with two sort of unique amateur sleuths.
Yeah, and the amateur genre, I mean, kind of as you were saying, Jeff, it is tricky to come up with the reason why not only they would, but why they should investigate, because I think for it to be satisfying, you have to answer, at least in the first, if it's a series, you have to answer those in the first one pretty clearly, because otherwise, like a reader, I as a reader would say, well, why don't the police, why are the police just not handling this? So
why do I care?
I think, and not to get too deep into the plot of Dark, but I think that influenced some of our plot decisions as well, to considering who had died and why the death was not being investigated like thoroughly or appropriately or something like that. So
and how that his connection was emotionally relatable to both of those characters, and then to make everyone in this chain of events care from beginning to end.
And from we've talked a little bit about your writing process. How was day-to-day writing on this project for both of you in terms of who was responsible for what, and then how did it end up passing between the both of you?
So we wrote it together literally at the same time. It wasn't like one chapter back and forth. So we got on Google Docs for 2 hours a day whenever Greg's schedule had like an opening, because he works more than me. So I was a bit more like,
most of it over winter break. I feel like
we did most of it over break. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he always wrote Sam and I always wrote Rufus. We shared all the other characters, and we literally, like, if I wrote a sentence, then he wrote a sentence, then I wrote a paragraph and he might write a paragraph. And the only thing that we made sure we switched on was every other chapter is whose POV it was.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, we literally were like riffing off each other.
Well, I know you've co-written at least one, Jeff, right? Or more. Is it
just the one with Will? Yeah.
What was that experience? Was that similar? What did you guys do?
We plotted together.
Oh no, that's already wrong. I'm just kidding.
And then I went away and first drafted the whole thing.
Oh wow, okay.
And I mean, occasionally I'd be like, I'm about to write this.
Yeah.
Coming a tangent off of what we'd already, planned. But then he went through in the second draft, and then he revised, rewrote, tweaked as he seen fit, and then we came back together in the next version to make sure it all sounded, one person perhaps wrote it.
Yeah, no, I think
to make sure everything was consistent.
We talked about that because I do think a lot of co-authors do it the way you just described, so that it does sound consistent. Because sometimes I think you do get those co-written pieces where it's just really up and down, and you can tell things were cobbled together. I hope that wasn't what Dark read like to people, but we, at least by keeping it chapter to chapter and having both of us involved through the whole process, I hope we avoided
it made a whole new author.
Yeah,
because in some ways it did. Yeah, I've talked to authors who have actually do what you do, sitting in the dock at the same time and doing it together. I've talked to others who they each have their POV character, and they'll write those POV chapters, first draft, and then they'll come together to make them, become that cohesiveness in a future draft. The strangest one that I've encountered is where first person would come in and write till they were done writing for the day, whatever that meant. And it could be mid chapter, and then give the doc over, and then the next person would pick up, read what had happened, and go, okay, here I go, and just keep going.
Well, I think that's how Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett wrote Good Omens. I think that's how they were mailing a disc, they were couriering a disc, floppy disk back and forth, because it was
back in the day.
It was back in the day, and when I read, and then because they were on totally different sleep schedules, because I guess one of them got up real late. And one of them get up in the afternoon and be like, well, what did you write this morning? And so apparently that works for some people.
It works, I guess. Luckily, we're on the same schedule. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it'll be interesting if either of you co-write again with somebody else, how that might change what you've done. What you've done here.
I don't know. It's so much pressure. I've never written a single line of dialogue for Sam.
Yeah,
I don't think I want to. I'm not in his head enough I can anticipate reactions or actions, but dialogue, I've never written for him.
Yeah, I think we did stay pretty clear. We tried not to step on each other's toes with that.
Did you ever throw each other for a complete loop? I can't believe you just put it on the page. What am I supposed to do with that?
Yes, I can't think of any
chat log
examples.
Sometimes for
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, like Carroll was saying, on the side there's a chat box that you can have running, and it's unfortunate that they don't let you save that, because
I know, because there's some
a lot of the times
comments.
But yes, I know that happened. I know that there were things that neither the other one wouldn't expect that felt right in the moment, so one of us would write it. I just am having a hard time thinking of an example.
I think most of it was just probably one line dialogues. You're like, oh, that was good. That was smart.
Yeah. I think we usually knew the general way the story was moving. So maybe the specifics might have been occasionally surprising, but it was never someone got killed that I didn't know was about to get killed, or something like that. That might have been a little harder to adjust.
That's unexpected.
You talk about the snark and then the very different behavior of Sam, and Garrett Kiesel really did an amazing job, like nailing their personalities
Yeah.
for the audiobook too, because it's very stark when you hear them talk.
Yeah.
It was hard to find. We listened to a lot of auditions. Well, Carroll listened to a lot of auditions and spared me from a lot, and I listened to some.
Like probably
Is that right?
50 plus.
Yeah.
What we went through, and then I
Yeah.
kind of like narrowed it down to like 20 and was like, these are the ones I, like having to get rid of the ones that were like robotic voices that someone had put through a software program, where I'm like, well, you're not even a real person. And then, having to really listen, because a lot of them got Rufus really well, but we were really concerned about Sam's character, and there were just so few that got how his deliveries were.
Yeah.
And we narrowed it down to like 20, and then the top 5, and Garrett kept coming out in like the top 2, and we're like, fuck it, let's go with Garrett. This guy clearly knows how to do Sam, and if I have any note about Rufus, I know that he can tweak it because he sounds great. But it was Sam that was the hard one to nail, and Garrett totally got it.
And I can understand that, because Sam is so nuanced between the anxiety on things that he carries, but he's also got this tremendous heart lurking in there too.
Yeah. And I don't know why, but apparently people think a deep voice means like a really deep voice. Like it was like, wasn't that the problem that we kept running into with that? It was like,
there's some guys were just like,
some of them were like caricatures. I was like, I don't think, you know that normal people don't, I don't know. But yeah, I know.
Bring it up a little bit. Come on.
Yeah.
Too much testosterone.
But yeah, because we wanted that nuance. We didn't want just for either character, right? You don't want them to be just these one note characters. But yeah, with Sam, that was definitely one thing I wanted, was what you described, that nuance.
So tell us a little bit about Friend in the Fire and what has brought Sam and Rufus back together a second time.
Ooh, Carroll?
No, you can say.
Well, because we've been writing and kind of been responsible for these different characters, this book in some ways was a little bit more Carroll's baby in some ways, because it's more about Rufus's character arc. Is that right? Is that fair, Carroll?
Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of planned it that way, that the first and fourth were like bookends, and the 2 in the middle are character arcs, individual arcs, and this one is Rufus, so it's a little more heavy on him. So it starts off with kind of like the first book, Rufus getting a message summoning him to a meeting, and of course things go bad, as you can guess. And so things go bad. He ends up calling Sam for help, and Sam is in a fly speck town in Missouri called Warreda that he has been hitchhiking through, and so he takes the call and decides to head back to Manhattan and see if he can help Rufus. And they kind of it is a serial killer from the past story. I mean, not to say, do you want to say more than that, Carroll? I don't. Probably not much more than that. Yeah. So yeah, they're trying to figure out who came after Rufus, but then they find these connections to the past and a serial killer who kind of went dormant and might be active again. So that's kind of the. And a whole lot of Rufus baggage. Oh yeah. That Pandora's box just opens and it all comes out. Yeah.
So if Sam's been hanging out in Warreda, did he happen to run into anybody we know?
Yeah, there's a little sightseeing.
Yeah, well, we tried to, like, I asked Carroll if it was okay before I did that, because I was like, I don't want to annoy people if that's annoying.
And I said, of course it's okay.
So it's really just one scene. He's in a bar. He's in the Pretty right in the gay club, the one gay club in this little town. And he sees characters who I think you can infer are Hazard and Summers, just out having a good time. And then he also runs into one of Hazard's exes, Nico, and this bartender. And, Sam, because he's Sam, does manage to hook up before he leaves town. So it was just a fun little cameo to say,
this giant universe is very interconnected. And I snuck a little bit of my stuff in there too, which is a little more subtle, but.
Yeah. We're hoping that we talked about some of Carroll's characters making an appearance in book 3. So hopefully, even if it's just an unnamed cameo, but we'll see. Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy doing that. I don't know if anyone else does, but have you done anything like that? Carroll, didn't you tell me you've done it even with other authors? Yeah.
Yeah, that's some of the real fun stuff when you could start crossing with other authors and just loading a character over here and putting a character over there and then coming back in. But
just a vague mention in dialogue, and readers are like, wait!
Yeah, it's fun. And the fact that Sam hooks up with Nico, I think is totally appropriate.
Oh, yeah. At that point in his life, Sam will hook up with just about anything that moves. And there's certainly some, Yeah,
Rufus, he's got some passive-aggressive remarks about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure, because there were nice passive-aggressive remarks and looks in book 1, too. And some not so passive-aggressive ones as well.
Some of those so you've been seeing anyone comment? Because he knows, well, duh.
Yeah, so we'll see how book 3 is, like Carroll was kind of suggesting. Book 3 will be a little bit more about Sam, and so we'll get a dive into and maybe even leave Manhattan. We've talked about possibly. I know, probably not for the whole book, but maybe they'll take a little jaunt somewhere and see how
get Rufus out of town, really stress out.
Yeah.
Nice. And then there's a book 4 too, it sounded like, as well.
Yeah,
that's the plan. Yeah, and that'll be kind of back to the focus equally shared in that 4th book.
What was it like for both of you to come back to this series and the writing partnership after working on your own individual projects between books?
We didn't have that because we actually wrote Fire quite a while ago. We actually wrote it almost a year ago now. Well,
we wrote quite a while ago.
Yeah. So there were probably 6 months between writing Dark and writing Fire, which isn't terrible. I mean, but
it's a time, but not that much.
When we go back to the next one, that'll have been a much longer chunk, Yeah. I mean, the thing that is oddly reassuring, kind of eases my crippling anxiety, is having someone else there, because if you're just, if I say I am totally stuck, Carroll will help me come up with something, and
vice versa.
There's no one to help me do that most of the time, so it's nice. Yeah. I mean, there is, probably half the stress that I would feel about a normal project, because I just can get on there and,
Yeah, there's not a fear of telling one another, I don't know what to do. Do you have any thoughts about this scene or about this character or about this arc or whatever we're doing? And I think that's also definitely an important part of the partnership, is that I, as also an anxious, crippled author working alone, that I can tell him, I have no idea, please help me, and he will not, make me feel bad about it.
No, because most of the time it's me saying that. I can't.
This is, as we mentioned, first time co-writing for you both. Was there trepidation about moving down that path at all?
No, I didn't have any data feel that. I mean, and part of it's just because I think until you've done a project, and you can probably speak to this as well, Jeff, but until you've done a project like that, it's hard to know, what could go wrong. There are things,
but it's possible.
Anything is possible, right? Yeah.
I think it also helps, though, that we're friends off the page, so to speak.
Yeah, and we like each other's books. I mean, that was a big deal. I wouldn't have done my 5th grader needs to go to the bathroom routine if I hadn't, liked Carroll's writing. And so
I wouldn't send him daily text messages about all the ways that he emotionally is hurting me if I didn't like it. I feel like most of my text message, Verizon would be like, wow, you sent a lot of text to him, and it's just a whole bunch of crying emojis.
Oh my goodness. God. What do you both like most about co-writing?
Definitely the having someone else with you there.
The riffing off dialogue.
Yeah.
Just the back and forth, I really enjoy, because I love dialogue heavy stuff. So, and sometimes Greg will just pull a one-liner out of nowhere that's just it's so almost monotone and serious in the way that Sam or another character might deliver it, but it's so ridiculous like it's delivered with such sincerity, but it's like a laugh out loud line where I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to like just type something back to this. It's so good. And he's really great at dialogue. So I just love any scene where characters really get going back and forth, and it's just like a little cat fight.
Yeah, I mean that I was going to say something similar. I think in the sense that there's, well, the line that I said in the middle of writing the first one, where Carroll, I think, told me was the nerdiest thing she'd ever heard. Maybe is that what you told me? I said something like,
not the nerdiest, but like I understood it.
I do believe the word nerdiest was in your response. I think that
one of the nerdiest.
Something like, I said something like, it's like playing Dungeons and Dragons. Isn't that what I said? Something like that?
You said something akin to, this is like professional D&D playing. And I was like, well, I understand that. I also have played tabletop RPGs, but also it was a very nerdy thing to say.
Yeah, it was extremely nerdy. So like, there is, I mean, but the fun, there is that fun, that like the pleasure of creating a shared world, right? That I think a lot of people can connect with. And then it's also just, it's, great as a writer to work with someone whose work you respect and see how they do things and how it's different from how I do things. And that's a great learning opportunity. So, there's a lot of craft and then just professionalization things that I have learned from Carroll for working with this. And so, that's been like a huge privilege.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and keeping up with Greg, honestly.
I can't even imagine.
I've told him this before, and I don't know if he like thought it was a joke or something, but like in all sincerity though, like sometimes when I'm having a really rough day with writing and I just feel like I'm never going to get this book done because I'm like dragging out 200 words in 4 hours, and I'm just like, you know what? You wrote with Greg and he's a powerhouse. You can do this. On Greg's day, he's going to text you and ask you how writing went today. What are you going to say? You wrote nothing? And it's almost like an aggressive way to like push myself forward. So like, I really did enjoy, even though he is just unstoppable. I don't actually think he sleeps, but it's been really fun keeping up with him because it's sort of like, when I feel like I'm falling into a rut, I'm like, no, because I got to do this with Greg. And then I get like almost a second wind to keep going.
Well, thank you.
I've often wondered if he has a clone.
I just don't actually think he sleeps.
That would be a way to solve it also.
I slept this week. I slept so many nights this week.
I slept this week. It was the best week of my year.
Yeah, it was great. I slept so much.
People should know, as you say that we're recording this as you're finishing spring break week.
That's right.
So
yes,
you have been on vacation this week.
That's right.
After this, it's back to the no sleep.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I will say, I know everyone's process is different. And that is one of the things that I think is different for Carroll and me. And that is one of the things that has been a good learning opportunity for me. I mean, and so, anyway, that's all that's all I want to say about that. But it really is, that is one of the huge perks of working with somebody else, especially someone who you admire. Yeah.
It's a really nice way of saying, sometimes he has to ask me in the chat thread, are you thinking or did you fall asleep?
I did think of that.
Sometimes
when she was telling you about composing in her head and like the draft in her head, I was like, yeah. And then sometimes I'll say, am I supposed to be doing something? Because sometimes I'm worried that I'm the one who's not doing something.
And I'm like, no, you're fine. I'm thinking.
Yeah. So yeah, I know what that looks like. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that I can't even imagine you've got anything for this, but maybe anything about co-writing that you liked the least, or was like, I wish I could fix this thing? Because it sounds like this was a match made in heaven, really, for the most part.
I think maybe editing is more tedious just because we're so interwoven. It's not like every odd chapter is Greg and I don't have to look at it because it's all his. It's all us all the time. So sometimes I'm like, I go to tweak, because I tweak things until the 0 hour. I'm like, if I can tell this sentence in 5 words instead of 7, I'll get rid of 2. And then I have to remember, who the frick wrote this character? Because sometimes it's hard to tell. We like blended a lot of the side characters really well, and I'm like, did I do it? Did he do it? So I just won't touch him because I don't know, and I don't want to step on toes either. So I just know I can tweak Rufus. That's fine. Yeah. So sometimes the editing's hard just because I can't remember who did what.
Like, we've both had to be willing to be flexible about how we do things, and it's not just one person's story. And there's never, I don't think that's ever become a point of contention, but it is something that I think we both had to be aware of and just say,
and how
like, what do you want to do?
The next time?
There's just, and I don't know, like one of the things that's lovely about writing a book, if you're a control freak, is it's your, like, you get to do everything, right? Like it's your piece of art that you made from beginning to end. And so, that is one of the things that you give up. Now, kind of, as I said, I think there's a lot of trade-offs, but yeah, that's, and we've both been pretty flexible, I think. So,
So I'm going to pull on this thing that you mentioned earlier because I have to know about it.
Oh yeah.
How did Hazard and Sebastian Snow get mixed
man,
up together?
Okay, so I messed up because I was so excited when we brought it up. I meant North and Shaw and Sebastian and Calvin, because I wrote this, my book that came out in March is called Indirection, and it's about a GRL type convention that
it's so good.
North and Shaw go to, and they have to solve a murder at this gay romance literature convention.
It's so good. It's so good.
And so one of the fun things that
over the top and amazing.
Well, it's over the top, that's for sure. I don't know about the rest of it, but it's definitely over the top.
It's amazing.
So Sebastian, who is a kind of secret lover of romance literature in Carroll's books, does make a quick cameo. It's after the murder has occurred, and when Calvin hears that someone has died, he makes Sebastian leave. He won't let him stay for the convention. He says they have to go look at some antique shops. Isn't that what something like that?
Yeah. Let's go look at antique shops or museums or something. Yeah. And I did write a companion piece to that in Interlude, which is a Snow and Winter short story collection. There's a short story in it called St. Louis What Now? And it's about Sebastian learning about this convention called Queer Expectations and like having to work up the nerve to admit to Calvin, yes, I like romance books and I want to go to America's Breadbasket to go to this event. And it's this whole 20-page short story working up to this. And then if you read Greg's book, you see they get there and they don't get to stay because there's been a murder.
Yeah, Calvin's not going to let him get involved in another. But maybe
so many things have happened over the years at GRL. So far, never a murder, though.
It's unbelievable, right? Like, when I was reading an early copy of it, I was like highlighting, like, this is believable, this is believable, this is believable. I had half of the book highlighted. I'm like, no, Greg, keep all of this because I literally feel like I've experienced most of it firsthand.
It is a love song to.
It's not a sober love song.
It is not a sober love song.
Oh, I got to go pick up that book. I'm so behind on all of your books, Greg, recently.
Oh, gosh,
that one sounds like a hoot.
3 months
it was fun to write. It was fun. That's all I can say. And it's silly, but that's a series that can do.
North and Shaw.
Yeah, that's a series that they're supposed to be silly, so it's okay. They can.
Yeah, and I could just imagine them in a GRL setting too. Although I would be very interested to put Hazard and Somerset in a GRL setting too, because Emery would not know what to do with that.
Yeah, that would really be.
Hazard would set it on fire in about 8.7 seconds.
I was gonna say there would be a murder again, but I don't think Hazard would be solving it.
Nope.
Yeah.
So what's coming up next for both of you outside of Auden and O'Callaghan?
Well, that's a good question. At the time of this recording, Interlude is out on April 8th, which is a novella-length collection of short stories for Snow and Winter. And I'm working on the first book in a new mystery series that is the Memento Mori series. Book 1 is called Madison Square Murders, and it incorporates one of my favorite subjects ever, and that is Victorian American mourning rituals, except it's going to be contemporary murders in New York City. So
sounds awesome.
Wait for the twist on that one.
Yeah, I'm excited for that because Carroll has sent me some like screenshots of her research books and like books bound in human skin.
This stuff that I
all
found.
Sorts of creepy, crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. It's gonna be great. And so about middle of May 14th, the next Borealis book will be coming out. It's called Misdirection, and that is the follow-up to the one we were just kind of talking about where they were at a romance convention. This is the next book. They are kind of hired, kind of threatened into helping get a senator's son tested regularly for drugs. But when they go to pick him up, he is missing, and there's signs of a break-in and struggle. So then they have to figure out where he went and what happened to him. Maybe, yeah. So anyway, so it's fun. Those are my Borealis books, and that's May 14th.
Because North and Shaw can never get a job that they want.
No.
It would seem that way, right? So we love to get book recommendations on this show. So what's a book that each of you have read recently that you would recommend to our audience?
Okay, so I can give two.
Okay.
One of the research books that I recently bought is, oh gosh, I can't remember the title now, but it's organized by Thanatos Archive, and it is a collection of Victorian postmortem photography, which, if you're not aware, is in the Victorian era. A lot of times, the only time people could afford to have a photograph of their family is if a member had passed away, because it was still an expensive process up through the Civil War. So there was such a high mortality rate that, especially among children, that sometimes the only photograph you had of your babies or your toddlers was, unfortunately, when they passed. So it's a huge collection of this photography and all of the history behind it, which was like absolutely worth every penny. Thanatos Archive is this amazing group of like sort of, I don't want to call them armchair historians, but it's just like this sort of ragtag group of people who are just so smart and so dedicated to this exact subject matter. And it's amazing. It's a really high quality book. I picked it up from the museum in Philadelphia that is a physicians and medical museum. It's awesome. And the other book that's fiction is Wayward, which is in the Union of Swords second arc for Hazard and Somerset. This is it. I got Wayward, Keeper of Bees, and then the short story collection. I'm officially all caught up on Greg's backlist, but I'm at the cool, 50% part of this book where I just sort of want to emotionally die because I can't handle it. So I'm like having to like fight tooth and nail for every page. I'm like, I just can't, but I will, but I just can't. So that's what I'm reading.
Yeah, I'm so jealous that you're caught up on the backlist.
Oh my gosh.
I literally spent all of January, February, and March just like
Carroll
diving. Like literally every week he was getting a text message with, okay, now I read this book. Screw you. I mean, I loved it, but screw you. You're mean to them. And then this book was amazing, beautiful, perfect. Screw you. On to the next book.
Oh, thank you. That is very nice.
So I got two more screw yous in me, and then I'm all done.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. Let's see. The one. So, Jeff, have you read Josh Langdon's Cozies, the Skull, Scrabble, and
Secrets and Scrabble?
Secrets and Scrabble. Have you read those?
I have not. Okay. Those books sit on my TBR.
Yeah.
Like no, so many things.
I asked because the third one just came out and I just read them, and I wanted to recommend them because they are so fun and just really comforting. Low angst, and you can read them in like 2 hours. I mean, they're real readable and short, and just like this incredible treat and way to spend some time. I was telling Carol how much fun they were the other day. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a cool Victorian death book or anything to recommend. But yeah,
I think you're the first one to recommend a Victorian death book. So.
I like it first.
It's gonna pay off. I've heard a lot about this Madison Square murders, and I'm excited for it. It's gonna be great. So, but we don't have a pre-order up for that yet, right? You don't have a pre-order for?
No.
Okay.
I have to get past chapter 1 first before they're
Carol.
I've written it like 5 times, Jeff. Okay, I just keep throwing it away.
Okay.
But there's no drafts. Don't worry.
No drafts. No drafts.
Oh my goodness. How can people keep up with you both online so they know when all this new stuff is coming out?
I'm not very good at that. Yeah.
I mean, website, and then there's links to Facebook, Twitter, email, Instagram, all that good stuff. Greg has that too, but
I do. Yeah,
he checks the best.
Probably Facebook. I mean, that's probably the best. I do have a website that I keep updated with my releases, but yeah.
And you've got your newsletter. I get the newsletter, and it's
like,
another book is out. Damn, I'm further behind.
I do give away a free short story with every new release. So that is
Yeah.
a good, that's a place you can keep
Good
track of what's going on.
incentive.
Yeah, they're just like fun little, just fun little things. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Greg and Carroll, this has been so much fun. I can't wait to get into Friend in the Fire to see what happens with Sam and Rufus next, and to know that there's 2 more books in this series beyond that is very exciting. So yeah, thank you for telling us all about it and your process.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.